Embattled but defiant, World Bank chief Paul Wolfowitz is under growing pressure to resign. Is the campaign against him politically inspired? How compromised will the World Bank's integrity be? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Jane Dutton. He's charged with improving economies and ridding countries of poverty. So how will his conduct affect the world's most stricken nations? Paul Wolfowitz stands defiant, refusing to step down as president of the World Bank. It follows claims he acted improperly in gaining a secondment and big pay rise for his girlfriend, fellow employee Jazeera. Mr. Wolfowitz still has the support of US President George Bush, who nominated him for the job. But European leaders led by Britain and Germany want him out. And if he doesn't go, some threaten to withhold funds which in turn would have been lent to developing nations. But Wolfowitz said he won't go, although he did admit to his mistake.
I made a mistake for which I am sorry. But let me also ask for some understanding. Not only was this a painful personal dilemma, but I had to deal with it when I was new to this institution and I was trying to navigate in uncharted waters. I didn't volunteer to get involved in this. I didn't get involved for any personal reasons, but rather to resolve something that I think posed institutional risk. I didn't hide anything that I did, and I'm, as I said, prepared to accept any remedies that the board wants to propose.
Even before this latest scandal, Wolfowitz's appointment as head of the World Bank was controversial. He was seen by many as a neocon zealot with no feel or qualification for the bank's mission of helping the developing world. But the immediate fear was that Wolfowitz would use the bank to further the global political agenda of Washington. He did little to dispel these concerns, surrounding himself with right-wing aides from Washington and abroad that were helpful to US policy in Iraq. Even more damaging was the post he left empty. For almost half a year, the job of Vice President for Africa was vacant, seriously reducing the amount of money committed to the continent. Wolfowitz decided to target corruption. He withheld aid from governments he decided were failing. Now, what infuriated bank employees was the cavalier way in which he applied this policy. Critics argued that stopping funds only hurts the poorest citizens, not corrupt officials. Some claimed the aid was withdrawn specifically from countries that refused to ally themselves to the US. Well, this isn't the first time that he's caused such controversy. He's been a divisive figure throughout much of his career. Even his educational background falls on two very different sides. After earning a degree in mathematics, he went on to do a PhD in political science. His dissertation topic, water desalination in the Middle East. This led to an academic career and posts at famous US universities such as Yale and Johns Hopkins. But his biggest role has been in the US government, where he spent more than 2 decades working in a variety of posts. As US ambassador to Indonesia during Suharto's reign, he was widely criticized for failing to speak out against human rights abuses. But he was also praised for reaching out to the Muslim world. Perhaps his most famous job, though, was his 4-year stint as Deputy Secretary of Defense in the current US administration. Wolfowitz, along with Donald Rumsfeld, was an architect of the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq. That war is now one of the most divisive issues in US politics. For her part, Jazeera had this to say: "I've now been victimized for agreeing to an arrangement that I've objected to from the outset." Well, joining us to dissect this more from Washington is Doug Hellinger, Executive Director of the Development Group for Alternative Policies, and Jack Berkman, a Republican political consultant. Mr. Hellinger, Wolfowitz is clearly a clever man. How come he was so stupid?
I think it comes from arrogance. I think that the things he talks about inside the bank, like corruption and transparency, he doesn't think applies to him. It's much like the US government generally. They talk about corruption of officials overseas, and yet the World Bank uses its funds through policy-based lending to actually bribe countries to open up their markets and to privatize so foreign companies can buy the assets. And look what happened. It isn't just the fact that he got into this mess a couple of years ago. It's also that he has been less than truthful. He's obscured the truth over the past week, and I think that gets people as angry as anything, because this lack of transparency is exactly what he has been accusing other people of.
So should he stay or should he go?
Quite honestly, I'm not quite sure it makes that much difference. I think the bank is at a critical stage right now. I think it's on the verge of irrelevancy. It's losing its leverage. Whether Wolfowitz stays, whether the Bush administration names somebody else, or even if we get to the point where a Democrat might name someone, unless the leadership of the bank changes course, and that is respects the changes that are taking place in the world. We're going through a sea change in the world right now. Financing from China, Venezuela, new markets, new investment opportunities means that countries all over the world, from Latin America through Asia, Africa, no longer have to receive money and advice from the IMF and the World Bank. They can choose to opt out, and one by one they're starting to do that. They're forming their own regional coalitions, financial groupings. Countries have more policy space now to put new economic policies in place. The bank has been dictating, pushed by the U.S., of course, as has the IMF, for 25, 30 years, a set of policies which have been very destructive. Unless the bank and the new leadership, whether it's or old leadership in the form of Wolfowitz, changes course and respects the changes taking place in the world and supports them, I think the bank is moving into a point with no return.
Well, I guess I'm confused. I mean, Wolfowitz has brought about, he's only been there a very short time. I guess I agree in part and disagree in large part with your other guest. Wolfowitz has brought about a lot of the changes that your other guest is talking about. Yes, there are all these problems with the bank, but frankly, they have improved since Paul has been there. I mean, yes, the bank has a long history of inefficiency and corruption. Frankly, I don't see the need for a World Bank. I'm not sure why it was ever created. I couldn't tell you today what its purpose is. I don't know why it's there. But if we're going to have it, a guy like Paul Wolfowitz, I think, has brought an awful lot of efficiency to the bank. Yes, he made a mistake. He admits he made a mistake. I don't think it's a terrible one. I think there's still some confusion about the facts. It's not even clear to me that his girlfriend wanted this job. As he said, this all happened when he was brand new to the post. You know, should he be removed for this? I think certainly not. I think he's brought a whole lot of efficiency. I think he has plugged the leaks on a whole lot of corruption at the bank. You know, the record of the World Bank in the last 30 years is just a disaster. I mean, they have pumped, by the best numbers I can see, they have pumped north of $500 billion into Africa. Most of the money's been stolen by various kinds of warlords and dictators masquerading as heads of state. And so Wolfowitz has plugged a lot of this. He's tried to stop a lot of this outflow of cash. Again, he's only been there a short period of time. I think he's done a dynamic job. I hope he stays.
Okay, Mr. Hellinger, for half a year, the job of Vice President for Africa was left vacant. What impact did that have?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, that has made that much of a difference. I mean, in fact, the bank is going forth with the same set of policies in Africa. For all the debt relief that is being granted Africa and aid, the same policies are being pushed. And, you know, we engaged Mr. Wolfowitz's predecessor, Jim Wolfenson, in a 10-country analysis on the ground of the impact of bank economic policies across the board, from privatization to trade liberalization to labor market reform. And what came out of that study a few years ago has showed it has been a disaster. Those same policies have been in place. So whether it's run by the head of Africa or by a department head or a vice president for Africa or Mr. Wolfowitz himself, I'm not sure it's that important. But can I just get to the point that Jack was making? You know, let's face it. A good part of this problem goes back to the very beginning of Paul Wolfowitz's term. There was a lot of suspicion about him. It was quite clear to a lot of people that his appointment, you know, that it demonstrated what the bank was about all the time, that it carried out the agenda of certainly the U.S., if not northern interests. And the fact that he has moved into Iraq with funding, has pretty much confirmed the view that he is carrying out that agenda. And for all the so-called efficiency that he's brought in, I really question that, or plugging leaks, when it came to countries in which the U.S. had a foreign policy interest, he did not push the corruption issue at all. So I think that his actions over the last few years have confirmed the worst, and I think that really,
you know what, Doug, you're right. But here's my very, maybe it's a little bit of a cynical rebut. But so what? The U.S. pays all the costs of collective security. The U.S. pays most of the costs of all of these international institutions. Why shouldn't America have some benefit from something like the World Bank? Why shouldn't there be some international dollars as opposed to just American money put into rebuilding Iraq? What in the world's wrong with that?
Well, quite honestly, the irony, of course, is that the United States, there's been pressure on the U.S. to give up some of its voting rights and some of its percentage of its financing. I mean, the U.S. should drop back. We have China. We have European expansion in terms of the EU. We have other countries that can pay a larger part of the bills.
Mr. Hellinger, I have to interrupt you there because we have a break now, but when we do come back, we discuss the fallout of the scandal involving Wolfowitz on the World Bank itself. Stay with us.